What's up, crypto enthusiasts? Welcome back to another video with Wise Investing. Today, we are talking about the most important topic if you want to make money in cryptocurrency, and that is how to calculate ROI/interest for staking platforms. And now all this boils down to supply and demand, and we're going to go through that in a minute. However, first of all, to lay the groundwork, you need to understand how inflationary systems work. So a lot of money systems are inflationary systems. The US dollar is an inflationary system. We have this entity called the Federal Reserve that is printing more, inflating the price, so the supply gets more every single year, and that is an inflationary system. So that over time, because supply is increasing, the value is actually going down. In fact, the purchasing power of the US dollar has dropped by 96% since the Federal Reserve started in 1913. So in 100 years, 96% of the value, the buying power of the US dollar has been lost because they keep on printing more. And where does that money go? It doesn't go to you. It goes into the financial system. So that happens, and yeah, losing 96% of value over 100 years is really bad. However, it happens relatively slowly because, we only live to be about 100 years old. So if I were to tell you I'm going to give you 7% interest on your US dollar investment, that's really good because, you're basically making 7%, you minus the inflation, it's better than a bond, especially now. It can be better than the stock market, depending on how well you do in the stock market. It can even be better than a lot of real estate as well. So we kind of view the US dollar as somewhat stable, even though we know it's an inflationary system and it is slowly losing value over time. Cryptocurrencies are also inflationary systems. Now, we've got Bitcoin, for instance, that is, started with 0 Bitcoin, and every 10 minutes, miners can mine that Bitcoin. It gets rewarded to them. There's about 18 million Bitcoin in circulation right now. There will never be more than 21 million. That's when the Bitcoin system will be completed and no more Bitcoin will be sent out. But the amount that gets sent out every 10 minutes, every 4 years, that amount halves. So it's an inflationary system, but the amount of inflation is actually lessening and lessening, providing that chokehold on supply, which, if demand stays constant, that makes the price go up. A lot of other cryptocurrencies are systems not necessarily similar to that, but the important thing to understand is who owns the supply. So Bitcoin was an entirely pure system. Satoshi Nakamoto didn't say, hey, before I release this system, I'm going to give myself 50% of all the Bitcoin. He didn't do that. Whoever mined it was the person that got the Bitcoin every single 10 minutes. And there's no, founder's fee, so to say. So who owns the supply? So there's several options on who can own the supply. First of all, you need to understand what percentage of the founders own versus the investors. And you'll see this with a lot of companies. In fact, every single other token that I know of besides Wise Token has some type of founders fee where the founders are paying themselves in tokens, holding a big portion of the tokens, the supply of the tokens for themselves and they say things like, oh, well, we just want to make sure that we're keeping stability within the system. And really what that means is, hey, we built this thing. We want to be rich off this first. So we're going to hoard this to ourselves because, we made the system. We can do whatever we want. That is inefficient, as completely inefficient, because that money could be used in better places. And I guarantee you the founding company, whatever entity created that cryptocurrency, where that money is going to is not helping you, is not really helping you as much as it could be, compared to if there was a neutral pot of supply. So Wise Token is the only token I know of that has a neutral pot of supply. And what that means is that during the 50 days of launch, the money that comes in, the great majority of that money is going to be paired with a huge pot of tokens and put onto a decentralized exchange to start the liquidity pool. And the contract does that. It's not controlled by any human. And then the contract burns the liquidity tokens that it gets so that nobody has control of this huge pot of money forming liquidity on the exchange. Now, why do we do that? Why it sounds like we're just throwing away potential millions and millions of dollars. But it's not doing that at all, because when you have a huge pot of money on a decentralized exchange, it is there for anybody to cash out, sell their WISE tokens to get Ethereum, or to buy, send Ethereum to get the WISE tokens. And having a huge pot of liquidity, neutral money, as a huge portion of that supply means that you're always going to be able to cash out or buy in whenever you want. And that's extremely important. One of the only reasons Bitcoin, being as simple as it is the biggest cryptocurrency, is not just because it's the first cryptocurrency, but because it has a huge amount of liquidity. People can go on an exchange right now and cash out hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoin if they want to. They can cash out just like that. And one of the reasons why, these smaller tokens, why they aren't successful, even if they're good, and have value and you have utility, is because you can't cash out of them. So if these founders actually did a huge pot of neutral money instead of enriching themselves and controlling it themselves, then they would be doing their entire project a huge service, and that is why WISE token does that. So understand who owns the supply. And if the founders own any portion of the supply, it's not as efficient as it could be. You want all the supply being controlled by the people who buy it, the investors, or it's being completely neutral, allowing anybody to trade against it, like we do in WISE token. The next is demand, because you could own all the supply in the world, but if it's not worth anything, if there's no demand for it, then you're not making any money. So this is simple supply and demand. And when you are evaluating this, how valuable, how much money you're making, it's really important to take both sides of the equation in, not just supply, but also demand. So another word for demand is adoption. How many people are using it? Because if people are using it, it provides value. The question we're trying to get to is, how valuable is it? And to understand how valuable it is, there's two things to consider, because there's two types of value. There's intrinsic value and functional value. Now, intrinsic value is innate value. It's natural value, and most cryptocurrencies do not have any innate value. Stable coins do. They have a value that is equal to $1. So if you get one DAI, it's going to be worth $1, give or take a few pennies depending on what day it is. Same thing with Tether. It has an intrinsic value because of its code pegged to $1. Now, that's not super exciting, because if you buy one Tether or one DAI, it's not going to be worth $2 next year, because it is pegged to $1. So it's kind of the best thing about it is also the worst thing about it, but that it has intrinsic value. WISE token is the only other token I know of that has intrinsic value, and the thing that's providing that intrinsic value is that huge neutral pot of money. And because it's there, because nobody owns it and anybody can trade against it, that huge pot of money is essentially backing the entire supply, providing intrinsic value for it. And that intrinsic value is going to vary. Unlike a stable token that's always pegged to $1, this intrinsic value, it can actually grow. So as the demand grows, the intrinsic values of that neutral pot of money is going to grow, making the entire supply's value grow. The next is functional value. And most cryptocurrencies work off this type of functional value. Bitcoin's functional value is the fact, first of all, that it has a ton of liquidity. You could always cash out millions, even billions of dollars if you wanted to at any time. That's a huge functional value. And the other functional value is the safety and security of the actual blockchain cryptography. Bitcoin is a ledger. It is going to keep your money safe. No one can hack into it as long as you own the private keys to your wallet. Nobody else knows your private keys. You are going to be safe because of that blockchain technology. So that is the functional value of Bitcoin. And why similarly it has a functional value, I think potentially more than Bitcoin, because we already have the intrinsic value of the neutral pot of money. So that means that when our functional value of staking, saying, hey, lock up your tokens and we will the contract will provide you with interest depending on how much you lock up and for how long. Since we already have an intrinsic value, providing an additional inflationary value of interest on top of that just gives it an incredible functional value. And the fact that the system is easy to use just creates even more functional value. I think Wise Token, it could be the missing link that could onboard the world to cryptocurrency. Now let's talk a little bit about the Wise specific ROI, because a lot of people see, oh, there's 3.5% inflation. Does that mean I'm only going to make 3.5% ROI every year? No, absolutely not. You can make a lot more than that. Definitely the potential there. So first of all, it's 3.5%, and that's 3% inflation that goes to stakers and 0.5% inflation that goes to referrals every single year. So 2 pots of money of inflation. The supply is inflating, but unlike the US dollar and the Federal Reserve, instead of that money going into the financial system, the US dollar is being printed, trillions of dollars, not going into my pocket, not even trickling down into my pocket. There's this thing called trickle down economics that means, oh, well, if we pump it into the financial system, eventually it'll trickle down to everybody and make everybody rich. It doesn't really work that way at all. Instead, us down at the bottom here are losing value. The difference, inflationary systems aren't bad. It's just, where is the inflation going? Who's it being rewarded to? In the Wise system, the inflation is being rewarded to people who stake and no one else. So yes, there's inflation. There's inflation happening. That does increase the supply slightly, and could make the value of the token go down if the demand stayed the same. However, all that supply is being rewarded to people who are staking the token. So 3% to stakers. The next thing to consider is that 50% of the supply is going to be in that neutral pot of money right from the get-go. So 3% inflation, you would only get 3% if 100% of everybody were staked all the Wise tokens that they had. But 50% is locked up on the Uniswap exchange. So that means the minimum you could make, even if 100% of people staked all their Wise tokens, is 6% right off the get-go. And just from experience of these types of systems, not everybody is going to stake 100%. It's probably going to be 80% or less, which means that you are looking at an interest level of possibly somewhere between 10 and 30% of whatever you stake. So that means, you put in 100, you stake 100 Wise tokens, you should be getting 110 to 130 back in a year, potentially, just based off of how the system works. Now that is how many extra tokens you have, but the value is going to be determined by the actual adoption, so people using the system. Because you could start with 100 tokens, end up with 130, but the real question is, did the value of a Wise token itself, did it stay the same? Did it go down or did it go up? And that is why it is really important to understand that interest, the actual interest you're getting, it has very little to do with the actual ROI you're making. And you're like, well, then what's it there for? The purpose of the interest is to reward people that stake. So in this system of Wise, people that stake are being rewarded versus people that just hold it in their wallet and don't stake it. That's the only differentiation. You should not be like, take these numbers, 3.5%, 6%, and think that, oh, that means I'm going to make 6% ROI. No. You could potentially be making a lot more or even a lot less, depending. Now, it's not going to be a lot less because we do have this neutral pot of money that's backing the entire investment. So it's definitely not going to be a lot less. It's going to be, either relatively same or more. And the cap on more is infinite, because the more people that join the system and put their money in the system, that increases adoption, that increases demand, that makes the entire price for everything go up and compounds your interest, giving you much more ROI. So please understand that it's about supply and demand, and the ROI you make in staking platforms is 100% dependent on how the price of that token appreciates versus the other money in the world, like the US dollar, and has very little to do with the actual amount of interest you're getting. The amount of interest you're getting, all that means is how well you are doing compared to other people who stake or don't stake. So it's going to be more if you stake, but don't take those numbers and think that those numbers are ROI. Hope that clears things up for you guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. This has been another video on Wise Tokenomics. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.